He's been a lame duck president for the last few months. We know that his party lost a lot of seats in the last election. We know that he's been really struggling to pass a budget. And we also know that his allies are being chased and are facing impeachment from the opposition parties, and that his wife is also embroiled in a corruption scandal. And it's led many people to think that this was a president who felt his back was put up against the wall, who felt that he didn't know what else he could do. And this was a big gamble that he was willing to take. And it seems like it's a gamble that really hasn't paid off.
South Korea's President Yoon's future is in doubt after declared martial law and then had to undeclare it just 6 hours later. Jan Camenzind Broomby is a broadcaster speaking to us from outside the Korean Parliament building in Seoul. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
What can you see? What is the latest?
Well, right behind me at the moment are a group of opposition politicians, opposition party members, and also citizens and members of the public that have really come along to show their support for the opposition party, but also show their anger at what the president has done here. This really unprecedented move in South Korean politics. South Korea became a democracy in the 1980s. The democracy really consolidated in the 1990s. We've had peaceful changes of power here ever since then, effectively elections every few years. And what happened last night was the calling of the enacting of martial law, really an unprecedented step by the president. And I can see people behind me who really are frustrated, they're angered, and initially they were bewildered. They didn't expect, and many young people especially didn't expect that this was something they would ever see in Korea during their lifetimes. I talked to one person who said, I really didn't think that in 2024 we could see this happen. Many young people have grown up hearing stories from their parents about martial law before the 1980s, hearing about the times when Korea was under authoritarian rule. They never thought that they would see it in their own lifetimes, and they're really upset about it.
So can you explain why was martial law declared in the first place? What was the catalyst?
Well, that's really the question that everybody is asking. And it's not just journalists that are asking it. It's not just the people in Korea, the people in Seoul that are asking it. It's actually the people of the president's own party that were asking this last night. They weren't consulted, they say, on this decision. The MPs, the representatives weren't they weren't asked about whether this was something that they wanted to be doing. The stated reason, the reason that the president gave, was that there were anti-state or pro-North Korean forces at work within South Korea, within South Korean politics. Now, that's all he said. He was not particularly clear about it. He was quite vague, actually, when he was giving those details. And there hasn't been much evidence that has come out that that's true. What we do know is that he's been a lame duck president for the last few months. We know that his party lost a lot of seats in the last election. We know that he's been really struggling to pass a budget. And we also know that his allies are being chased and are facing impeachment from the opposition parties, and that his wife is also embroiled in a corruption scandal. And it's led many people to think that this was a president who felt his back was put up against the wall, who felt that he didn't know what else he could do. And this was a big gamble that he was willing to take. And it seems like it's a gamble that really hasn't paid off.
We were saying a while ago that, comparatively, people were kind of impressed by the kind of the calmness and stability of South Korea. And now we have this. Is this all down to him? Incompetence, personal stuff going on, misjudgment, or is there any question of outside influence trying to upset the stability that we have seen until now?
Well, I think Korea, like its neighbor Taiwan, is in a particular geopolitical situation, given its neighbor to the north, given the proximity to North Korea. And that does leave people sometimes wondering whether there is some kind of external influence. I don't know if we can say that there's any massive proof that that's been the case here. It seems that many people think this was really a case of domestic politicking or an enormous miscalculation on the part of the president. But as I said, we haven't heard much from him. The opposition party members also don't really seem to know what's going on. And it's left people really confused, perplexed. Yesterday, that confusion really turned into anger and has led to people now calling for him to resign. The opposition party just beginning the impeachment proceedings in the last few hours as well, really trying to get rid of him now after that failed enactment of martial law.
Okay. Jan, thank you very much. Jan Camenzind Broomby, he's speaking to us from outside the Korean Parliament building in Seoul. The Korean Parliament building, as you would expect, very modern looking, grey. There were a lot of people on the steps, or people speaking in loudhailers, and many, many flags of protest. President Yoon of South Korea is struggling to hold on to power after his botched attempt to install martial law. After only a few hours, he had to stand the armed forces down. Why has this all happened, and what will happen next? Let's speak to Richard Spencer, who is the Times' China correspondent, who has analysed the crisis for the Times this morning. Morning to you.
Good morning.
What did you make of what went on last night?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty extraordinary, I think, even for people who watch South Korean politics, which is often quite emotional and volatile, shall we say. It's a politics that looks very normal on the surface, but still has the scars of a kind of fractured past within it. So yeah, I think it took everyone by surprise. President Yoon is a hardline conservative, and we're working in a world where political certainties aren't what they were, not just in South Korea, but around the world and around the Western world. And where sort of the right wing is shading into a sort of hardline populism, as in America and elsewhere. It's slightly different in South Korea because it does have a history of dictatorship in living memory. So these moves, like declaring sort of martial law and exceptional circumstances, have this incredible resonance, which really mobilized the opposition to defeat it. But it came out of the blue, I think, for most people, as far as most people are concerned. Even though, as I say, President Yoon is fairly conservative by the standards of modern Korean politicians.
So how do we square the circle between, South Korea being a kind of beacon of stability, or supposedly, with characters like President Yoon, with what happened last night, with, a certain number of dictatorships? Can both things be true?
Well, I mean, you could argue that the outcome of this, where, it seems that the forces of the opposition, and indeed, elements of President Yoon's own Conservative Party, People Power Party, took action, told the president to step back, went to Parliament, went through the constitutional process of voting down this martial law, and the army then and President Yoon backing off, suggests that, there is a sense there. I'm reminded of of what happened in Spain in 1982, if I can go back that far, when a country that had established democratic norms was suddenly faced with a military coup, and the parliamentarians, including people from the right, stood up in Parliament and said, no, we're not accepting this. And eventually, with the support of the king, the army backed off again. So, these things are not quite as, nothing is quite as stable as we think they are. I think that's one lesson we should learn. I'd say, in South Korea, that for the last 40 years, this democratic, almost miraculous democratic and process has become institutionalized. This transfer of power between right and left parties, all within the same sort of democratic purview, if you like, accompanied by this extraordinary economic growth. You thought, well, South Korea is established as a democratic and prosperous nation.
Yeah.
But I'd say, like many countries around the world, particularly in East Asia, but also elsewhere, that is not a historic norm over the last century, if you like. So, there are other forces in society which still bubble up.
Richard, thank you very much for that. That's Richard Spencer, who is the Times' China correspondent. You can read his piece in the Times today.